Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, and best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to learn how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I'm happy to have as my guest, Brett Shockley of Journey, a leading trusted identity platform and a Blue Prism Technology Alliance partner. I'm also joined by Satish Shenoy, RVP of Strategic Technology Alliances and Partnerships at Blue Prism. I will be talking with Brett and Satish about the importance of trusted identity for the omni-channel customer experience. Brett, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you start us off with an introduction?
Sounds good. It's great to be here, Brad and Satish. Appreciate your bringing me into the podcast. Just a little background on myself. Been in the contact center industry since the 80s. I started a company called Spanley Communications in the industry, another one called Calabrio. Ran Cisco's contact center business for a few years at the start of the IP contact center revolution. And I was at Avaya for a number of years, most recently Senior Vice President of Strategy, Business Development, and the company's CTO.
Excellent. Thank you. Satish, how about an introduction for you?
Thank you, Brad. Satish Shenoy. I'm the Regional VP of Technology Alliances at Blue Prism. Been here about 2.5 years. It's an exciting time to be here at Blue Prism with robotic process automation, and especially in the contact center, as it's one of our biggest areas of growth. Been in the contact center space for almost 20 years, and I had the opportunity to be at Avaya when Brett was there, and really enjoyed that part of the journey where our paths crossed, and enjoying reconnecting with Brett and his team in this exciting new chapter. Thanks again, Brett, for being here with us.
As we wrap up our 3-part podcast series on automating the contact center, today we shine a light on identity and data privacy. Without a doubt, it is difficult in the contact center to be sure your customer is really who they say they are. And as you guys know, the bad actors are getting more and more creative at working around the typical ways of establishing trusted identity. This is where Journey enters the picture. Brett, for those listeners who are not familiar with your company, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Absolutely, Brad. So we founded Journey a few years ago. I co-founded it with my son, Alex Shockley. Alex came out of the digital marketing world. I came out of the contact center world, and we were talking about how could you change the nature of orchestrating the customer journey. And one of the key things that we realized very early in our discussions was the fact that verified identity really makes all the difference. If you could figure out how to make verified identity the root of trust in the relationship between a customer and a business, you can completely change the nature of all these applications. They're easier to build. They're much more comprehensive. And as we took a look at the problem, and we brought in our CTO, Michael Frendo, who's at Cisco and Avaya and Polycom most recently, we started talking about the problem, and we decided that identity was not a sort of a point authentication problem, but it was really an entire lifecycle problem, a journey problem, if you will, that goes from enrollment to authenticating across multiple channels, to the ways in which that you do interactions and transactions in a secure manner while protecting the privacy of the individual. And you really had to take a look at the whole life cycle and think about how could you manage identity throughout that life cycle. So that really became the foundation of the company, looking at the problem that way. And everything we do today is based on this concept of a zero-knowledge identity network that underpins all of the applications that can be delivered on top of it.
Excellent. Satish, let me ask you, why are the contact centers now the single greatest target for fraud?
So, Brad, we know that in this post-COVID kind of era, contact centers really the way that more and more customers are engaging with the business. Now, and way after COVID, I think that's unlikely to change because the preferences have changed. Now,
Mhm.
fraudsters have figured out that the call center agents are highly vulnerable to social engineering and more easily manipulated into granting access to an account that belongs to somebody else. This dynamic was only made worse this past year and even now, because what we find is more and more agents are working from home
Mm.
and they are more sympathetic to an increased level of anxiety with customers. And so they tend to let their guard down sometimes. And this is where technologies like Journey make it much more possible to strengthen those defenses. So that's why I think with contact centers being such a great target for fraud, that's why we are interested in working with companies like Journey. But by the way, Journey doesn't just work in the contact center, they work beyond that. But a contact center is a great use case for Journey.
Yeah, when you think about identity and sort of all the things that are involved in that relationship between a customer and a business, contact center is a very key area, and it's got a bunch of challenges, as you mentioned, because, well, today 50% of center agents are working from home, and we all know what it feels like when you call someone and they're perhaps in some other country sitting at their kitchen table, and you're telling them all about your account numbers and answering sensitive questions about healthcare or financial information, and you're wondering, how are they securing all this over there? How do they really know it's me? So contact centers have been a pretty key area, but you can take areas like cryptocurrency and all of the challenges of security and privacy in those transactions as well. Or every employee that has to log in and they're working remotely. How do we really know that the person who's logging in is the employee we hired?
Makes sense. Satish, how do the existing ways of establishing trusted identity fall short?
One of the challenges we see in the contact centers is that the managers and agents are burdened with time consuming, manual, mundane tasks and some insecure ways of authenticating the client that's coming in. In fact, what we see is that these agents are not fully equipped. As Brett was saying, they're not fully equipped to really handle those customer authentication procedures well. And so we see that this leads to some employee and customer dissatisfaction. It negatively impacts contact center metrics and so on. And the company also gets incredibly impacted because they don't have good ways of establishing identity. They have huge customer experience issues. Customers lose trust with that company they're dealing with. They leave those companies that they're working with because trust is a big thing in dealing with any business. And if you lose trust, you lose the customer. Anything else you would add, Brett?
No, I completely agree with that. If you take a look at sort of all the methods that people use today, like knowledge-based authentication is a technology where about a third of real users get it wrong because they've forgotten something that they had provided previously. And fraudsters and targeted attacks get it right about 2/3 of the time because they've looked up the information on social media or the web. So those kinds of technologies don't really get you where you need to go. Voice biometrics types of applications are a big improvement, but they're still only in the 90 to 95% of veracity. And when you start talking about financial transactions, for example, or healthcare transactions, it'd be nice to be up in the 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million kind of veracity, even on a single. And a lot of the techniques that have been used to deal with multi-factor authentication in the contact center and beyond, for example, sending code numbers over SMS, NIST, the FBI, and the EU are all starting to say that SMS is not appropriate for a second factor because it's too easily hacked. So a lot of things need to change to be able to improve the veracity of authentication. And at the same time, you have to do it in a way that doesn't increase the friction to the point where you ruin the customer experience.
So, Brett, how does Journey work? Can you expand on this?
Absolutely. One of the challenges when you look at sort of all the interactions that happen throughout a customer life cycle is identity tends to be tied to all of them. And yet most of the solutions that exist today are individual point solutions that we might use to create a new account, to authenticate when we call the call center, or do some kind of a transaction with them or sign a document. One of the things that we've done is we've come up with this zero knowledge identity network, which we've actually applied for about 24 patents on. We've received 2 so far. And what this zero knowledge identity network does is it streamlines the way that you interact around identity. It simplifies it, and it provides an unprecedented level of security and privacy. I'll give you an example of the way a transaction might work on our identity. So let's say that you're talking to a call center agent and they need to collect your social security number or verify it as part of a transaction. Well, that's one of those transactions that kind of makes you squirm in your seat when you give it to somebody who's working at their kitchen table. So in our case, what might happen is they could press a button in their agent screen that would essentially package up a request for that information with the public key, cryptography key of whoever's going to verify it. That's sent to the customer's mobile phone or web browser. The form pops up, they enter the information. It's encrypted with the key of the destination. And then it's double encrypted as part of our solution as it crosses our network. When it's delivered to the verifier on the other side, it's unencrypted. They provide the certification. Yes, in fact, the social security number matches. And instead of giving the agent the social security number, they send them a certificate that says that this information's been validated. So you can imagine in regulatory kinds of situations, HIPAA, PCI, or just sensitive information like a social security number, you've completely changed the game because the agent no longer sees or hears the information, and yet it's been fully validated by whatever source, either inside the company or a third party.
Journey is certainly very innovative in your use of zero knowledge and zero trust to establish trusted identity in the contact center. Can you elaborate on this a little bit more?
Sure. So the way this is set up is there's essentially what we call a Journey identity gateway that is at the edge of the network in the enterprise or in a third party that might be validating a driver's license or doing a background check or something like that. And that identity gateway process is essentially connected to a zero trust network. And then our zero knowledge network is embedded inside of that zero trust network. That's the general platform that's used to be able to control these transactions. And then pretty much anything you might want to do from a biometrics point of view, from a reporting point of view, regulatory transactions occurs on that network. And so let's say that you want to be able to do something like the enrollment that I mentioned earlier, where you want to be able to look at somebody's driver's license and make sure that this is the person that they claim to be. Maybe it's because you want to send money or because you're opening a new account or something. We basically allow the customer to do a video selfie, compare it to a picture of the front and back of their driver's license. We can use the zero knowledge technique that I described earlier to go off to a verifier who can check the information directly in the DMV records. We can also check the terrorist watch list from the government and verify that this person is who they say they are against their government credential and that they're available to open this account and have this kind of transaction. Those kinds of things can be used to open an account. And then when you might call to a call center later on and you need to get authenticated, we can do things like open up with the IVR and say, for faster service, please log into your mobile app. You say, what the heck? And you look at your phone and it says, touch here to log in, Face ID spins. And within 1 or 2 seconds, we've logged you in and we've got you on your way to the right agent. And if you take a look at today's world, you can spend an average of 45 to 90 seconds authenticating somebody in a contact center. With the typical methods today, that's going to be 50%, 60% valid, maybe as high as 90% valid. We're doing it with a 1 in a million veracity when we spin that Face ID. And that's just one of many techniques that can be used.
Oh, that's really impressive.
When you start talking about dealing with fraud and security and customer data privacy, normally there's a trade-off that people talk about, fraud versus friction. And one of the things that's really different about having taken a step back and thought about the whole problem and created this network-based approach to it is we can simultaneously improve the customer experience while improving the security, managing the data privacy, and dramatically improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the operations in the contact center. So for example, if we can authenticate you to 1 in a million in a couple of seconds, we can save up to a minute per call in the authentication process. We're eliminating the passwords and all the silly questions that frustrate everybody when you call somewhere today. You really can step through a whole variety of things. When you start thinking about sort of the effectiveness of the operation, another good example of what people get frustrated with in call centers is when your phone rings and it says unknown caller, and only about 15% of those calls actually get answered. And then in most cases, you hear it's your bank calling about possible fraud, for example. You're not sure it's them. They're trying to figure out if you're you, and you end up hanging up and calling them back. So about 3% of all outbound calls actually turn into what's called right party connect. And in other words, an authenticated conversation where you can have that transaction. In our case, what happens is we'll let you know that a call's going to be coming in the next 10 minutes. We'll give you options to self-serve or request that call right now. If we do that, we're taking it outside of the robo-dialing regulations because you requested the call. When we deliver the call, we're going to change the caller ID to tell you who's calling. And the likelihood that you're going to answer that phone and have a good conversation, instead of being 3% of the phone calls, it's going to be 30% or 50% or maybe even greater. When that call comes in, we're going to show you the identity of the agent, much like an Uber or a Lyft or the gig economy is going to tell you about the person who's about to serve you. And the agent's going to see that you're validated. So there's going to be no silly back and forth about who's who. It's going to be validated both ways. So you're dramatically improving the efficiency and the effectiveness. You're getting rid of all the frustration and the customer satisfaction issues. So there's a lot of things like that we can do by putting these things together in different ways. One of the stories that we ran into recently that I thought was interesting is we had a meeting with the lead enterprise architect for a major US bank. And about 20 minutes into the conversation, he said, so far, I haven't seen anything I couldn't do another way or don't already have. And I was like, oh, gee, we're in trouble. About 20 minutes later, he stopped us and he said, this is really dope. Thought about the whole problem. I normally have to go buy a whole bunch of point products and string them together and try to integrate them to do what I need to do across the life cycle. And it never ends up working. I always end up throwing them away before I ever complete the process. And so that's really key, is this ability to mix and match all these capabilities together in whatever needs to be done around that customer journey.
Awesome. I'm assuming your son understood what he meant by dope, but did you understand what he meant by dope? That's the question.
My son started laughing hysterically, and I had to think about it for just a second.
So Satish, what was it exactly that prompted Blue Prism to pursue a partnership with Journey?
If you hear Brett's passion, I think that gives you a clue. This whole area of moving from knowledge-based authentication to identity-based authentication has so many implications. Everything from improving efficiency and effectiveness, but also really helping these customers to have much more secure transactions, really help with driving even better managing those agents. So if you think about Journey and Blue Prism, we can replace knowledge-based authentication with multi-factor biometric authentication for all voice and digital interactions with minimal integration, and it can scale to millions of customer interactions. Now, Journey's authentication can be used also across any channel, including IVR, bots, live agents, kiosks, or in-app interactions where you hold up maybe your iPhone, or think of being able to do that, right? Face ID kind of interactions. You're taking the contact center into the next generation almost. Now, Journey also has a security model where it involves encrypted and ephemeral data exchange that verifies the information instantly and does that without revealing unnecessary information to agents. It's much more simple to secure transactions with like secure prepayments, e-signatures, e-forms, and so on. And this makes it really flexible for businesses and agents to engage with customers and authenticate them. So it's a very powerful way to engage for businesses to really manage those customers and their information while providing the service they need.
Perhaps you could add on to that, Satish, and talk about some use cases that demonstrate how Journey and Blue Prism are better together.
Yeah, so in terms of the use cases for us, I think where we start this journey, pun intended, is that we looked at customer authentication in an omni-channel contact center. If you look at a lot of the contact center providers, it's still knowledge-based authentication. That's not their bread and butter, right? The authentication part. The use cases that we enable are truly bringing that contact center from a security standpoint into this new next generation, I would say. There are a number of use cases. and especially because it can span the omni-channel. Actually, Brett talks about a couple of them. Actually, I'll let him explain some of those use cases because I think he does it better than I can.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, Satish. One of the things that I think is really interesting about what's happening with the identity network approach in this world, in a lot of respects, it's parallel to what's going on with robotic process automation in that, historically, if the contact center wanted to do something new and interesting, they'd have to go find somebody in IT to go rewrite their application. And we all know what happens when that occurs. It takes a long time, and oftentimes you never quite get it done. Contact center operations people I talk to sometimes say, hey, I'm not sure why you're talking to me. Identity is something that's done to me by some guys in the fraud department or the authentication group in IT or whatever. And then when they see what we do and how it can completely change the nature of their customer interaction, streamlining it and help them meet their key metrics around things like average handle time, customer satisfaction. We can do things, for example, now that we've brought the mobile device as an example into that multimodal interaction, at the end of a call, instead of saying, please hang on for an important customer satisfaction survey, which about 4% of the people do, it pops up on your phone. Again, just like the gig economy, give it 3 smiley faces and instantly you've got data on virtually 100% of your phone calls that you can use to pay your agents based on performance or measure how you're doing as a company. And when you take a look at some of the ways that you build these into that contact center experience, we all know that people are the most expensive part of a contact center. So if you can make them more efficient, that's the biggest leverage you can get. Well, using RPA to start to tie in some of these capabilities that we can bring to the table, whether it's this is the risk of the transaction because we know the veracity of the authentication. We know the behavior of the customer as they've rolled around the call center. We know something about their ANI as it became part of the transaction. We can provide that, and RPA could use that to bring that into the workflow of what happens at the desktop. When we talk about being able to verify a bunch of data, but only want to share it with an agent on a need-to-know basis, the consolidation of the agent desktop that Blue Prism can do allows you to do things like redact information before the agent gets to see it, so that even though we might have collected their entire street address, let's say, in a form, you only might show them the city and state that they're in. So they can have a great conversation, highly personalized, but they don't actually have to have information that they don't need for the transaction that they're doing. In the world of zero-knowledge cryptography, the example that is often used is the idea of a young person walking into a bar and handing the bouncer their driver's license. The driver's license gets their name, address, birth date, etc., all kinds of information they don't really need to know. They just need to know my daughter's over 21 years old and she's allowed to go in and have a drink. It's exactly the same concept in the contact center, and working together with Blue Prism, we have the ability to do those kinds of transactions very easily and very quickly and make them part of an ongoing stream of that customer journey. So it's not just a single custom thing that's been developed by IT.
Brett, as I look at the partnership, you look at the trifecta of cybersecurity. There's information governance, there's user governance, and IT governance. The Journey seems to really cover most, like you were saying, end to end. You don't have to have point solutions for the various aspects of the customer journey. You guys actually cover the trifecta quite well by a pretty significant extent. So.
A good example of that is we've been talking contact center and thinking in terms of the customer agent interaction, but there's also the agent or employee aspect of it. And in fact, this could apply just as well in the back office as it does with the contact center agent. If you think about as an employee logging in a large enterprise, you're probably going through some kind of single sign-on application. You might get logged into 100 different applications. You're going to get logged out whenever the shortest time to live pops up on one of those applications, and you're going to have to log back in again. If you're an agent working from home, you've got to not only log in, but they've got to make sure that you're still sitting there throughout the day to be doing these kinds of transactions. If you're working from home doing back office things, you've got similar kinds of issues. So one of the things that we have done with our technology is we've also turned it towards the employee. So we can let you log in with your face instead of logging in with your username and password. We can do continuous authentication, so we can check and make sure that you've been in front of your computer at least sometime in the last 30 minutes or 15 minutes or 2 hours. If you do that, we can do things like refresh the time to live on your single sign-on solution so you don't have to log back in. And if you're in a tightly managed scenario like a contact center, we can let your supervisor know if you haven't been at your desk in the last 10 minutes, or we can log you out of your VPN, or we can, provide additional detail that can be used. We can see if there's a second person looking over your shoulder. So there's a number of other applications that we can do that go well beyond the traditional customer agent interaction in a contact center. And I see RPA as really playing a role with Blue Prism across all of those.
Fantastic. Brett and Satish, thank you so much for your time today and your insights. It's been a really interesting conversation. In our omni-channel world where we live, customers are interacting with companies in so many different ways, sometimes simultaneously, as you know. So having a trusted identity solution like Journey that can authenticate so effectively across all those channels is really critical. So it's been great hearing your thoughts and hearing about how Blue Prism and Journey are partnering together and extending the value across the contact center. So thank you both, and I wish you well.
Thank you so much, Brett, for taking the time and being a great partner of Blue Prism. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Satish. I really appreciate the time and enjoyed the conversation today, and love working with Blue Prism.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.